Hey there, Internet. So Saturday night rant time. Saturday night rant time. So probably not going to be too long. I try and keep some notes through the week. What might come to mind. Usually things that aren't deep research things. And I didn't have a lot. One that would have been deeper research time was something from the Republican Study Group proposal, and I didn't delve far enough into it. So this is kind of the minor thing. This is the problem with the Republican Party. They won't say especially right now, what are we for? And this is for any politician, Democrats too, to some extent. Say, help me stop Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, what are you going to do when she's just stop her? Just saying, slow down there, Democrats, is not what you're going to do. And so I just tried to look quickly into this. Rick Scott put out a great big thing that I have not had time to read through. That was like this is what we're going to do if we take over the Senate. And so I didn't find what they were actually talking about. It was talking about some way of changing overtime, which I think is a dumb proposal because Democrats are going to twist that around. Just give people flex time. That in flex time is where you say you can have your time and a half for going over 40 hours, or you can have 1.5 hours for every hour worked, extra time off some other time. And I've seen other proposals, and there was one about 10, 12 years ago at the height of the Tea Party movement. I go into work one morning, and this coworker of mine just comes in. I mean, he was almost drooling with the idea that he could take the overtime he worked, save it, and at the end of the year, when it was nasty out here in Washington, weather's bad, he could just say, I'm going to go someplace sunny and warm every couple of weeks. And the people I heard complaining about it were either people that obviously didn't read the bill or were just lying, one of the two. Because if you read the all of 3-page bill that it was, it said, look, you have your employer had to agree to it. You had to agree to it. At any time you'd say, give me my money. At the end of the year, if they didn't let you take the flex time, they had to pay it out to you in time and a half at the end of the year in one big lump sum. So where was anybody losing? And it's kind of would be a really smart idea. Give us flex time. I've heard of arrangements where people have had that sort of thing. Maybe they were in supervisory positions. At the time, I remembered reading someone saying, oh yeah, I comment on the proposal someplace in a forum, and they said, I worked at a refinery, and every time we'd have a shutdown, these guys would work 60, 80 hours a week if they were supervisors, because they could get it, apparently. They were salaried or something. And then after they were done with the shutdown, the guys would disappear for a month, and you wouldn't see them again for a month because they took the flex time. That by itself, just say, look, instead of trying to treat some weird 80-hour for every 2 weeks thing, which could create a work your butt off one week and the next week hardly work and still get the same pay, it would still give you the same effect, but maybe you get extra vacation time and you can plan when you're going to take it. I've known people that had those informal agreements off any kind of books with employers. They would. When I was teaching in my instructor's school, we had a gal. I'm Facebook friends with her now. She's actually a doctor. She had her husband at the time in the Navy, but he was stationed in San Diego. So every time she worked up enough flex time doing this, she was one of these well ahead of her age peers in terms of where she was in her life. She would take off for a week, go to San Diego. I was like, how do you manage to get that much time off? She said, well, I have this deal worked out with Doc. I was like, oh, okay, that works. I guarantee you it wasn't legal. But they were doing it anyway. Why not just formalize that, and then you don't have anybody able to play games? And of course the employer can say, look, I don't want to deal with that. You're just going to get overtime. Okay. And So, I mean, there's people, or they were, so you had the people that lied about it, about what it was about, or hadn't read the bill when they were lying about it, or they were people that just didn't understand that they thought that the government's supposed to just determine the distribution of wealth. So, I mean, that would be a good thing, at least if they were going to have a thing to restore the family. I mean, I'm looking into their lean into the culture war, and there was a memo put out. And, you have the cultural conservatives, the economic conservatives. I lean more toward the economic side. I have some libertarian sympathies. Small L. I'm not in need of a reality check. And this thing called Restoring the American Principles. And if I just go through the bolded out points, it says we support protection of children from far left ideologies. We support policies that gives working families flexibility. We support policies reflective of the reality that parents, not government officials, are the best qualified people to make decisions about the emotional, spiritual well-being, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of children. We support flexible and pluralistic approach to childcare, and ensuring working parents can choose the option that's best for them without overbearing government mandates. Yeah, how about bring back home-based childcare? We support elimination of policies that discourage family formation, like marriage penalties in the federal programs and tax policy. We support efforts to incentivize work as a means of uplifting families, basically work, not welfare. We support, which Democrats will probably run from that. We support empowering parents with more choice and control over pre-K and K through 12 education. We support reforming outdated higher education system. We support reforming foster care and adoption system. We support efforts to end abortion. Now, they need to drop this stuff about abortion right now. And that doesn't say I'm going to be pro-abortion, but work on the adoption stuff. Work on making sure you got it so that the mother's life being endangered is taken care of, when it's not dying from, where you don't have a 10-year-old having her health destroyed because you didn't write the law correctly. So that, but we can presume that if you're under 14, it's going to be destroying your health. And it's rape then anyway. But you look at some of these things and they're broadly good proposals. The flexibility thing, that's what they're talking about, is we support policy to give working families flexibilities in where and how they earn a living and the kind of benefits they receive, instead of one-size-fits-all government-run prescriptions. Now, you take that and you say, look, we should support flex time. That'd be a great idea. I mean, right now in my life, I want the overtime. Once my wife and I have kids, it might be nice to be able to say, hey, boss man, I don't want to call my boss out by name. I don't want him roped into my politics, whether he agrees with me or not. Can I do a work 5 days one week and 3 the next, and 4 the next, or something, and have it count, or 6 days one week and 4 the next, for 5 days total? Can I, or something, work flexing around like that? Or can I take the flex time so I can take that extra vacation with my kids? My previous employer, I was there so long I had 4 weeks paid vacation. It might be nice, especially with the number of overtime hours I work now, comparatively, to be able to say, I'd like to bank a little of that if I don't need the cash right away, to be able to take that extra time off. I'm going to have knee surgery. I have to skip the regional black belt test. I'd say Don test for people in Subacto, but I'm talking to the general public. I'm going to have to skip the regional Don test. And, this last one was the first one I was actually, second one I was actually able to make since COVID started. And so, before I used to make every last one of them, because I have to have knee surgery. I can't work the hours right to do that. If I had flex time, maybe I could have. And so that's an example of where that'd be a great idea. I mean, I've long supported having flex time. The child care thing. They got pretty much regulated out of existence. Home-based child care. They're trying to make them the equivalent of a preschool. When I was a kid, we went to a child care that the first couple were certainly not licensed in any way, shape, or form. Maybe even the first 3, if you count the one my mom picked. But, no, that would have been first 4 if you can include the one my mom picked. They just went someplace, had maybe make sure the kids ate lunch, keep them safe, keep track of the kid. When you're at the bottom of the economic ladder, that's what you can afford. But when you raise the cost of that so much, and then I'm sorry, but people don't realize how the benefits cliff is a real thing. I've had coworkers where they said, coworker had his significant other had to choose between taking a promotion, which would give them more money in cash wise initially, but with her increase in income, it would have put them over that limit where they would lose benefits that they were now dependent on. And so they had to choose: do we stay stuck on the government teat, or do we take a hit, come off of it in order to build further? And that's a hard thing to negotiate for a lot of people. How do you get off of that? And when you cut out the bottom of the market on childcare, parents can't negotiate that cliff as well, because the cost of the childcare has gone through the roof because you've added so many requirements and made it so hard. And of course, the places that remain like it because they have less competition because of higher barriers to market entry. But there's several of those things in here. Not really bad ideas. So there are some things that they want to do, but they won't formalize, and they really need to make like a contract with America, a contract with Washington. Take those initiatives that the Restore Washington group is pushing, the packet of, I think, 11 or so initiatives. Just say, look, they get on the ballot, we're going to vote for them. Instant, tell you what we're about. So there is that. There are some things coming around that's saying what they're really about. Of course, protecting women's sports from all the weird transgender stuff and whatnot's a good thing too, and that is in there. But it was just something that stood out to me where they brought that up. I thought, you're approaching that the wrong way. But the other thing that really was kind of in the forefront of my mind, which I intended to speak longer about, but it was in the first part of what I talked about here, is let's talk about Ukraine for a minute. So the Russians had a pipeline, went from there to Germany, them to Germany. There was 2 pipelines. One was never completed or used. The other had some gas in it. Somebody blew it up, or somehow it blew up. I think we shouldn't rule out the possibility of an accident. We shouldn't rule out the possibility of deliberate sabotage. But let's think about this a minute. Does Germany have an interest in blowing it up? Not really, because if this all dies down, they can get gas via Russia. Does other countries in Europe have an interest in it? Not really, because I think other countries in Europe might actually get gas via it. The United States, does it have an interest? Well, in theory, you could argue that we blow it up so that we keep the Europeans more tied to us, except ostensibly they're supposed to be our allies. We don't want them being economically hurt. So we really don't have an interest in blowing it up either. And does Russia? Well, ostensibly no, because it's their pipeline. That's how they sell the gas to Europe. You got to transport it to market if you're going to sell it. Who has motivations? Anybody wants to deliberately drag us into war. So obviously, Ukraine would have a motivation. They don't have the means. So we can rule Ukraine out. Someone suggested China would have, I heard that on something, and would have the motivation. They certainly have the motivation to want us and Russia fighting with each other. I don't know if they have the means. If you are determined to get us into war with Russia, you have the motivation. If it was somebody in the United States, and I don't really know that it is, you have the means and the motivation. Now, I'm listening to DW, which is a German broadcast, and they suggest that a theory of motivation Russia would have was just to say, because there are contractual obligations to sell gas to Europe, they are, if that pipeline was destroyed, they can't transport it, they can't sell it. They can be like, sorry guys, the pipeline blew up and it blew up in your waters. I don't know that any of it is really the truth. they're trying to say what the truth is, and they can't even get in and investigate it yet. That seems like kind of sketchy to me. Let's think about this for a minute. I looked into who owns that pipeline. It's owned by a consortium, which is 70% Gazprom. Gazprom is the Russian gas monopoly. So saying that, well, we're going to strike at them for getting at our infrastructure, it's kind of their pipeline, guys. If they blow up their own pipeline, is that really a cause for war? No, it's not. And then you have that idiot in the Kremlin saying, well, we're going to annex Ukraine, when over half the population in those oblasts, which is kind of like a province for those over here, have voted to join Russia. Well, over half the population of the oblasts are in Ukraine, still in Ukrainian-controlled areas. In addition, no one really believes that was a legit vote. When they did the Crimean vote, people living in Crimea said that we weren't even given the option to return to Ukraine as an option on the ballot. So it was a sham election that time. It's a sham election now. But now Putin said, oh, we're annexing it, so now it's Russia, so we're going to defend it. Everyone's worried about Putin now using nuclear weapons. Let me tell you why he's not. There's a website out there, and I can't remember the name of it. I'd probably have to spend time searching, because I found it listening to Timcast IRL, that you could actually zero in where a nuclear strike would be and of the type, and show you if it was what the blast would be. If it was a ground strike, it would tell you where the fallout would end up. The fallout always seems to drift to the northeast. That means the fallout's heading toward Russia. If they hit those oblasts, at the very least, it's either going to result in the fallout landing where they want to control, or it's going to result in fallout on their own territory. Russia is not that stupid. Even Putin isn't. One of the history channels I listen to called Tick History, great little channel. The guy is Australian. He has a history degree. He doesn't ascribe to Madman Hitler theory because that absolves Hitler in a way of his evil. And it's kind of an interesting take on it. Putin, unless he's got the mentality that Hitler had at the end, I'm going to take Germany with me because if they lost, they're not worthy. Unless Putin had that attitude, and I don't think he does, he's not going to drop nukes that are going to result in fallout on his own country. Now, let's say he said, oh, you're supplying Ukraine. Okay, we're going to hit London. The British and the French have enough nukes to make it not worth it to him, because it's not just Biden and him being rather spineless, just like Obama. I mean, Neville Chamberlain had more spine than Obama when it came to foreign policy. You're going to have the Russian or the British and the French also have nuclear weapons. So if he starts using nukes, unless someone's going to say, yeah, you nuke Kiev, we'll go ahead and nuke Moscow. Ukraine is not a NATO member yet, and hopefully they won't be. I'll get to that. The problem is, they nuke London. The British only have one solution. That's to go, you took our capital, we're going to take yours, we're going to take St. Petersburg, we're going to take Volgograd, we're going to take Nizhny Novgorod. And now we've wiped out 4 of your largest and most important cities. A collective response from NATO would probably result in quite a few more, and multiple bombs on multiple Russian cities. Putin has to know there's only one response to him dropping a nuke on anybody. Even if he decided to, nuke Warsaw. Okay, that's the way it would end up being. So it's really not in Putin's interest, and he probably knows it. He's rallying the nuclear saber, hoping that people will back down. But you still cannot have 2 nuclear powers coming to direct blows. This is why Ukraine, we cannot be sending troops, and into Ukraine. We can't be doing strikes for them. We can't put in a no-fly zone for them. All we can do is sell or give them weapons. It's got to remain a proxy war. Period. And as for Ukraine joining NATO, that is irresponsible for Zelensky to even suggest it. I'm like, I don't even want you in NATO, period, even after this. Because, maybe as part of a peace deal, okay, you can keep the territories you've claimed, but Ukraine becomes part of NATO, maybe. And that's just a suggestion I would say. Here's your choices. Because if you're going to try and that's trying to literally drag us into the war. Because once they're in NATO, then when Russia continues fighting them, then we get drug in and we're expected to come in with the potential for troops, for aircraft. So, and yeah, there's even more justification for us to give our latest weapons. So, Ukraine has no business joining NATO. Just as I said, Finland and Sweden shouldn't be allowed in because they weren't spending enough on their own defense. Because we've had enough problems with countries like Germany not spending, and Bulgaria not spending, and Romania not spending, and there might be one of those that I falsely called. But there's so many countries that weren't spending at least 2% of GDP on their military that are part of NATO. We had enough problem with that, and then we just added 2 more. So I don't want a country like Ukraine that for years went and didn't take care of its own defense, which made it weak by itself. This thing with Ukraine being too weak to defend itself started in the 90s. And this is one thing for all you liberals out there who don't like the U.S. military. You always say, oh, the United States spends too much on its military. Got news for you. You guys don't understand, and I've never served, but you do not understand that some of what we say we have is not what we really have available because of stuff that's either reserved for training or is spares or is in maintenance. We have one aircraft carrier right now that's in pieces because it's going through its midlife refueling. About halfway through, they go through a 5-year period of taking it into dry dock and rip everything out, including the fuel, put it all back together, and again, it takes about 5 years from start to finish. One of those aircraft carriers is out of commission. Others are in other states of various states of maintenance. Others are actually only 2 or 3 are actually deployed, and you could surge up to I think 5. So this should be a lesson of why you don't go light on your defense. But Ukraine does not belong in NATO, period. We do not need to be getting into Ukraine, period. Supplying weapons, fine. But there also needs to be a limit of saying we've spent enough, dude. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I'm sorry, but the Russians blowing up their own pipeline is not worthy of us going to war over that. So, in fact, there's another pipeline coming out of, I think, Norway that now goes to Germany or Poland that just fired up this same week. There are other ways to get them energy. Germany was dumb enough to get rid of their nuclear power plants because they thought it's too dangerous because of Fukushima. In doing so, they stuck themselves on an actual higher carbon output energy source. They created this problem, and they made themselves dependent upon Russian energy. So just think about it in those terms of whether it's actually worth it. It is not. And I'm sorry, but ultimately, what happens with Ukraine is ultimately not a direct threat to the United States worthy of us going to war. I mean, I did support going into Afghanistan because what else are you going to do? I, in some ways, mistakenly supported Iraq, in some ways not. I'm not going to rehash that. But we went into Iraq ostensibly for reasons that were about national security. I think it was completely bungled, but granted, not having served and not being on the ground. But ultimately, that was why we went in there. It was a perceived threat. I do not see how, but regardless of what happens in Ukraine, it's a direct threat to us. Other than you're trying not to appease somebody because we saw what happened with Hitler. So anyway, we're way past my intended time limit. You guys all take care, and until next time.